Captain Abhimanyu, Professor Balachandran, Mohan, other Great Lakes faculty here, and friends. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this convocation and commencement ceremony. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here amongst all of you today on this special day for each one of you. Some of you are finishing your degrees here and are stepping into the wide world beyond. Some of you others are starting your studies here with hopes and aspirations in your hearts. At these occasions, it is typically customary to share some insights gleaned from one's own journey, some learnings that can be passed on, absorbed, and hopefully which will help as you begin your own journeys into the world and into life. And particularly for those of you stepping into the working world, in some ways one can say that the way in which you have lived your respective lives is about to change fundamentally. What do I mean by that? No more will you be defined by how well you can do an exam, or how well you can write a paper, or how well you can understand classroom concepts. What will matter now is how well you can understand the business you are in, how well you can understand what your boss needs, how well you deal with office politics, how well you can manage your career over a long period of time, and how well you can pace yourself. Because the race that you're now running, and I hate to say this, and to call it a race, but it is a long and arduous one, full of competition and with little place to hide. If that sounds tough, then I'm afraid to tell you that yes, it is tough. I don't want to scare you. That is not my intention. But let me tell you a few of my life's learnings. Keep in mind that I finished my MBA almost 30 years ago, and I have the gray hair to prove it, although I guess you can't see it under this cap. The learnings will be particularly relevant to those who decide to start their own businesses or become entrepreneurs eventually. Before I go into that, however, a quick word for those of you who are not so well versed with ReNew Power. I started the company 7 years ago, and at that time, we have grown to become India's largest renewable energy company. We now build, own, and operate wind and solar assets and sell power to India's distribution companies. Since our inception, we have created assets of more than 35,000 crores and raised more than 7,000 crores of equity and 24,000 crores of debt. We now employ more than 1,000 people directly and more than 5,000 indirectly. And we have paid so far more than 1,400 crores of taxes to the Indian people. We are also now the 15th largest company in the world in renewable energy. And with the Indian market growing so strongly, we should rise up that ladder fairly quickly. It has been a difficult road because any execution in India is quite difficult. But nevertheless, it has been a fun journey and one that has taught me a lot. And let me share some of those learnings that I've had with you. The first and most important learning in some ways is something that Professor Balachandran had also talked about in his speech. Integrity is critical as a way of life, and its value truly manifests over time. What do I mean by that? When I started my business, I was put into a situation where I had to make a choice. Do things the honest way, or I hate to say this, in the Indian context, the normal way. It required me to think hard about my life, my value systems, my family, how I was raised. And when I did so, the choice is very clear to me. I wanted to do things the right way. For me, it did not matter where I finally ended up at. But whatever I did, it had to be in sync with my core value systems and my core beliefs. We had not only to be a clean energy business, but also a clean business. I then decided that even for the people I hired, this would be one of the basic tests. Those are my people that I hired who had to interface with the external world, whether with the government or with lenders, thought I was actually crazy to want to do business in this way, and probably thought that we would never be successful. but I stuck to my guns. I also found that a lot of people who were forced into a certain style of working in other companies were quite relieved to join us. And now when I speak to some of them, so many years down the line, we are glad that we pursued our business in an ethical and clean manner. And it's very hard to talk about this area without really getting into a lot of dirty laundry, which I really don't want to do. So I'll really just skirt around the edges of some of these issues. Later, much later, I realized that operating in a certain way was getting us grudging respect from a lot of other industry players. It helped create a reputation for us as a credible, clean company with no hanky-panky. This later helped us get better valuations, as new investors were more comfortable investing in a company that had clean corporate governance and no other overhang. Now, 7 years down the road, our reputation is in fact our biggest strength. People want to associate with us, and they respect us for what we stand for as much as they respect us for the things that we do. And this includes our JV partners, employees, vendors, investors, lenders, etc. So keep in mind that when I took the decision to go down a certain path, I had not realized the benefits of going down that path. It is only later as I continued down this journey that I realized that there was actually tremendous value in going down a high integrity path. And what I learned, therefore, that good values eventually also lead to good valuations. Take the case of various banks in India. You can see which are the good banks because of the way that they trade in terms of price to book ratios, and other banks that are in the news for all the wrong reasons. Or take the case, for example, of the HDFC Group, which is now the second largest group in India after the Tata Group. These are some of the groups that I admire for their strength of character and working in a certain way, and not just momentarily, but over a long period of time. And it's that consistency over time and taking the long view that is very important if you truly want to build a good business. This is a very important truth to understand. You cannot try to build something for the short term. The second learning that I had along the way: do what is right for your business, not for yourself. All too often, we confuse the two. Ownership and management are two separate things. You should run your business only if you're the best person to run it. If not, let somebody else do so. And I say this for the sake of your own equity. For example, raising capital and diluting and losing control is painful. But if in the process you build a stronger company, then it's worth it. Who should take precedence, you or your business? I decided that I want to build a business to last. I wanted to leave something meaningful behind, not just to make money. And I cannot emphasize this enough. As the Bhagavad Gita says, do not worry about the fruits of your labor. Just do your job in the best possible manner. Similarly, build your business in the best possible manner too. Also ask yourself why you want to do a business. Usually the reason is to want to make money, which, while it is the most common reason, is also a shallow reason. There's nothing wrong with it, but at some point, you have to have the view of wanting to create something worthwhile, contribute something to humanity, have a builder's mindset, build something to last. Don't do things with a short-term outlook. And have a giving mentality rather than a taking mentality. Take it from someone who's gone down that same path that you are about to traverse. And these are learnings that come to you over time. In the beginning, of course, your motives could be to work, to earn money, to start a business to earn money. But then very quickly you realize that that's really not what the whole thing is about. And you start setting new targets for yourself and new benchmarks. And those are things that in the longer term really have much more value and meaning for yourself as an individual. So yes, you start with the motivation to make money, but it really cannot stop at that point. And as Professor Balachandra said, you have to, after you've earned it, you have to find a way to return it. But that returning can be done in so many ways. It can be, as I said earlier, done by building a business also that lasts, where you employ a number of people, where you pay taxes, and where you create something that contributes meaningfully to society. So It's not that running a business or building a business is something that you have to then stop if you want to start returning or go into that part of your life. Thirdly, and as I said earlier, build a company that outlasts you. What we don't realize as we start a business is that not only are we building a product or a service, but at the same time, we also have to build the organization that is going to do this business not just now, but in the long term. Therefore, build the people, build the organization, and build the company, as well as building whatever product or service that you're building. This often gets overlooked, especially by those who start businesses straight out of college with little work experience. Ultimately, it is organizations and people that create value. And it is not only about hiring people, but about countless interactions that happen between employees, the systems and processes of an organization, which are like cement that bind the bricks together. If those are weak, then the structure will collapse. My suggestion, build the company, focus on it, spend time on it. That's a big thrust area for us at ReNew. I am personally very focused on employee engagement efforts, for example. Last year, our score was 63%, and we were ranked at about the 60th percentile among all Indian companies. That was simply not good enough for me. This year, when we repeated the survey, we scored 72 percentile, almost in the top quartile of all companies. But that is still not good enough. And we want to be among the top employers in India. So recently, I have held meetings with all the different groups, millennials, the second level people, the juniors, etc. And we are quickly making changes and implementing the feedback that we've received. Another big area of focus is employee safety. Apart from being the right thing to do, it shows employees that we care for them and makes them feel wanted. Another point is that some people get very busy doing things. It's very easy when you're doing or running a business is to focus on just doing everything yourself and not focus on building the organization or hiring the right sets of people. That is a way in which you'll get overworked. You'll think that you're working very hard, but eventually you're doing yourself disservice because in the longer run, you will simply not be able to do everything. So you have to really spend time to build the organization as well and to hire the right kind of people. The other thing is, and something that I've come to realize as I've run this business over the last 7 years, that common sense is actually much rarer than you'd expect it to be. People make all sorts of silly mistakes in running businesses. And I've seen that happening with some of our competitors. And I find that mistakes really are what sink businesses over time. So common sense execution, to my mind, is what, over a long period of time, really in some ways is what differentiates you from competition. This is at variance with what we'll learn in a lot of business school books, which will talk about competitive advantage and a whole bunch of other potentially management jargon. But in reality, just doing the right things, which make sense at that point in time, and just consistently doing that over a long period of time, not making fundamental mistakes, is really what is eventually going to make sure that you're going to end up being the winner rather than the other company out there. The other thing I'd also like to advise you on is that when you do your jobs in respective organizations, and this is separate from starting a business, one thing I've realized is that whenever I talk to younger people, is that very often when I give them a task to do, they don't think about what that task means from my standpoint. And they tend to not really understand the totality of what I'm trying to achieve. And therefore, when they come back, if they don't understand the full things of what I've been trying to say, they end up doing a very narrow job. Whereas if you actually try to understand where your boss is coming from, you try to understand and address his entire problem, that ends up being somebody who can actually deliver a much better job and a much better solution than somebody who just does the narrow bit of what they're asked to do. So whenever you go to your boss, go not just with problems, but also go with solutions. And again, this is a very trite thing to say, but again, it's incredible how many people just don't do that. It's very easy to just go to your boss and dump something on his table without actually suggesting any improvements or any solutions. So when you actually are asked to do something, try to understand where the boss is coming from and solve the full problem and think on an end-to-end basis. The last thing I would like to say, and this is something again that Mohan had talked about in his speech, is how you deal with adversity in some ways defines who you're going to be. Resilience is one of the most underrated qualities. You have to pick yourself up when you go down. And let me tell you that life is full of adversities and problems. Sometimes they will seem insurmountable, and they will be. But life has a tendency to move on. And what had seemed really horrible will wane over time. Pick yourself up from the floor. Get up and keep moving forward, as that is very critical. And never lose your sense of optimism about life, that things will eventually turn out all right. Take joy in the small things of life. Look forward to simple things like the next test match or the next IPL season, or spending time with your children or your family. Read a good book or watch an interesting movie. Those are things that nobody can take away from you. The point I'm making is that life does not stop, and you cannot let something set you back permanently. After I finished at IIM Calcutta, I surprisingly had cracked all the jobs that I wanted. And then I went to Columbia, and this was way back in the early 90s, at which point in time India had not yet started its reform program. And really, people in the US didn't understand India very well. And so when I showed up there, and after my Columbia degree, I started applying for jobs, I had a really rude experience. I must have sent out almost 200 CVs for jobs. And when I got my first rejection letter, it was a real surprise to me. It said, "We like you a lot, but..." And then I must have got almost 197 such rejection letters. And out of the 200 CVs I sent out, I got precisely 3 interview calls. So I really got used to reading those kind of, "We love you a lot, but..." letters back in the mail. But the important thing is that I finally ended up getting that one job that I wanted. And the reality is you can't do more than one job at a time, right? So I got that one job. But that experience just taught me to pick myself up and just move on with life. And things will eventually work out, and not to give up. And the funny thing is that when I was looking for funding for ReNew, and again, Mohan talked about this, your entire career of 30 years, as in the case of Ray Kroc, and maybe a little bit less in my case, it prepares you for something eventually. And you can never guess what it's going to prepare you for. But when I was applying for funding for my, not applying, but trying to get funding for my company, I must have applied to at least 30 private equity and venture capital investors. For the private equity investors, they said, "Look, you're just too early in the game, and it's too early for us to fund you." And for the VCs said, "You know what, you just need too much money. We're used to doing Series A, Series B, and all of that, and you're just looking for a very large amount. So it doesn't really work for us." And nevertheless, I just kept going and meeting as many people as I could. And finally, I happened to knock on the door of Goldman Sachs. And they had invested in a similar company in the US, and they were looking for a platform like mine to invest in. And as it turned out, we went ahead, we finally got talking further, and that investment worked out. And it's really that one lucky break in some ways that you require. And my learning from that was that at every stage of your life, opportunity is lurking behind a door. It's just that you don't know which one it is. And the funny thing is that even though people say that opportunity knocks, actually opportunity does not knock. It is you who have to do the knocking. And you have to knock on as many doors as you can possibly find, because you don't know which door hides the opportunity that you seek. And that really means that you have to work really, really hard all the way through your life. You have to persevere, and you have to be persistent. You just simply cannot give up, ever. And that is, if there's one lesson that you want to take from whatever I'm saying, it is that you have to keep working hard in life, because you never know when you're going to get that one lucky break, and you'll only get that lucky break if you've actually put in the hard yards and you put in the hard effort over the past years of your life. I would say that's enough gyan from me for one day. And I'm sure that you all want to get out and celebrate. Please go ahead and do that. Have a great time because you have certainly earned it. All the best and congratulations again to those of you who are graduating, and best of luck to those of you who are starting. Thank you for inviting me.